The phone rang at 7:42 in the morning on a Tuesday in March. Walter Brennan was in the kitchen pouring coffee. The number on the screen was his accountant's. Walter had been working with Philip Doherty for 31 years. Philip never called before 9. Walter answered on the second ring. "Walter, I just got off the phone with the IRS field office in Knoxville. They're auditing your 2018 through 2023 returns, all 6 years. Schedule F deductions, equipment depreciation, fuel, repairs, conservation easement, everything." Walter set the coffee pot down. "How much?" "They're disallowing $317,400 in claimed deductions. With penalties and interest, the assessment is $402,180. They want a response in 30 days. They've assigned a senior auditor to the case, a man named Dean Krasick. He flagged your file personally." "Why?" "Because of the receipts, Walter. They want documentation, every single one. They said, and I'm reading this directly from his email, they said that, quote, taxpayers who maintain inadequate or non-contemporaneous records cannot expect deductions to survive examination, end quote. He's making a point of it. He wants every receipt for every claimed expense across 6 tax years." Walter was quiet. "How many receipts is that?" "Walter, I don't know. Thousands." "I have them." "You have them where?" "In the spare bedroom, in shoeboxes." There was a pause on the line. "In shoeboxes. That's how Eleanor kept them. After she got sick, I kept doing it the way she did it." Philip exhaled slowly. "All right, Walter. Bring the boxes to my office on Thursday. We'll go through them together." Walter hung up the phone. He stood at the kitchen window for a long time. The sun was just clearing the ridge to the east. Frost lay on the pasture below the house. He could see his cattle in the lower field, the older heifers gathered near the round bale. He was 71 years old. He had bought this land in pieces, the first 80 acres in 1981 for $32,000, the next 60 in 1989 for $41,000, the final 120 in 1996 for $104,000, 260 acres total. He had paid every note off. He had never inherited a dollar. His father had been a mill worker in Polk County, Tennessee. His father had died in 1976 at the age of 54 with $3,200 in a savings account and a 1967 Ford pickup. Walter had been 22. He had come home from the funeral, looked at his mother, and decided that he would never live in a rented house and he would never die without something to leave behind. He had worked other men's farms for 9 years. He had saved every dollar. He had married Eleanor Halpern in 1979. They had bought the first 80 acres 2 years later. Eleanor had handled the books. She had kept every receipt for every expense related to the farm from the day they signed the deed. She had used shoeboxes, cardboard, each one labeled with a year. She had stacked them in the spare bedroom on a metal shelf Walter had built her in 1983. When the cancer was diagnosed in 2015, she had spent the last 6 months of her life sorting the receipts inside each box by month. She had put rubber bands around each month's stack. She had labeled the rubber bands. She had told Walter to keep doing it the same way after she was gone. He had. For 10 years. Every receipt, every month, every rubber band. She had died in March of 2016. The shoeboxes covered the entire wall of the spare bedroom now. 43 boxes, 1 per year going back to 1981. The 6 years the IRS wanted were stacked together at the end of the second row. Walter loaded those 6 boxes into the bed of his pickup on Thursday morning. He drove the 18 miles into Cleveland, Tennessee to Philip Doherty's office. He carried the boxes in, 2 at a time. He set them on the conference table. Philip looked at them. "All right, let's start with 2018. They worked for 9 hours. Philip cross-referenced every claimed deduction against the receipts. The work was slow. Eleanor's organization was meticulous, but the volume was enormous. Feed, veterinary supplies, fuel, equipment parts, fencing, seed, fertilizer, lime, contract labor, propane, electricity for the milking parlor, repairs to 3 tractors and a hay baler. By the end of the day, Philip had verified 84% of the 2018 deductions. The remaining 16% he set aside for further review. He looked up at Walter. "Walter, the documentation is there. It is unusually complete, but there is a problem." "What problem?" Dean Krasik is not going to accept handwritten ledgers and rubber-banded receipts as adequate documentation. The standard the IRS has been applying since 2019 is contemporaneous digital records. Even though your physical records are valid, his audit posture will be that they are not, that they are reconstructed, that they are unreliable, that they are not what tax law calls sufficient documentation. They are sufficient. They are, but he's going to fight it, and the burden is on us. What does that mean? It means we need to go to the audit meeting. He's scheduled it for April 14th in Knoxville. Bring the boxes, all of them, not just the 6 years, all 43. I want him to see the entire system. Walter did not understand at first. Why? Because if he sees one shoebox, he'll dismiss it. If he sees 43, he'll have to reconsider what he's looking at. The audit meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning on April 14th. The IRS field office in Knoxville was on the 3rd floor of a federal building 3 blocks from the river. Walter drove up the night before. He stayed in a hotel that cost $91. He woke at 5. He had cleaned out the bed of the pickup the previous Sunday. He had laid down a tarp. He had loaded all 43 shoeboxes into the truck on Monday afternoon. He had covered them with another tarp and tied it down with rope. Philip met him in the parking garage at 8:30. He looked at the boxes in the truck bed. He did not say anything for a moment. All right, let's bring them up. It took 4 trips. They used a hand truck Philip had borrowed from his office. They stacked the boxes in the hallway outside the conference room. Other people walked past. Some of them stopped to look. No one said anything. The audit meeting was in conference room 314. Dean Krasik was already inside when they walked in. He was 46 years old. He wore a charcoal suit. He had been with the IRS for 19 years. He had a senior counsel from the IRS Office of Chief Counsel beside him, a woman named Margaret Vesco, 51, who had introduced herself by handing Philip her business card without standing up. Krasik had a laptop open. He had a stack of printed exhibits. He had a binder labeled Brennan, tax years 2018-2023. He looked at Walter. He looked at Philip. Then he looked at the open door, where the first stack of shoeboxes was visible in the hallway. He smiled. What is that? Philip did not answer. He turned and brought in the first stack of boxes and set them on the conference table. He went back for the second stack, then the third. It took him 11 minutes to bring all 43 boxes into the room. He stacked them along the wall. They reached almost to the ceiling. Krasik watched him. The smile did not leave his face. When Philip sat down, Krasik leaned back in his chair. Mr. Doherty, I appreciate the theatrics, but I'm sure you understand that the volume of paper your client has brought to this meeting does not, by itself, constitute adequate substantiation under Section 274D and Treasury Regulation 6001-1. Receipts in cardboard boxes are not contemporaneous records. They are artifacts. The service's position is that any deduction not supported by digital, dated, third-party verifiable documentation is presumptively disallowed. He glanced at Margaret Vesco. She nodded once. Krasik continued. Mr. Brennan, I want you to understand the position you are in. The service has identified $317,400 in unsupported deductions across 6 tax years. The statutory presumption favors the service. We have offered your accountant the opportunity to provide proper documentation. He has instead delivered a wall of cardboard. The assessment of $402,180 will stand, unless you can demonstrate, with admissible records, that each deduction was both incurred and ordinary and necessary for your trade or business. He picked up his coffee. He took a sip. He set it down. Take your time. The room was silent. Philip Doherty did not respond to Krasik. He turned to Walter instead. Walter, open the box labeled 2003. Walter stood. He walked over to the wall of boxes. He found the 2003 shoebox in the second row. He carried it to the table. He took the lid off. Inside were 12 rubber-banded stacks of receipts, one for each month. Eleanor had labeled the rubber bands in her handwriting. Philip reached into the box. He pulled out the stack labeled November 2003. He removed the rubber band. He sorted through the stack. He found a single folded receipt near the bottom. He unfolded it carefully. He laid it flat on the conference table. He turned it so Krasik could see it. He spoke for the first time since Krasik had begun. Mr. Krasik, this is a receipt from Polk County Cooperative, dated November 14, 2003, for the purchase of 3,000 pounds of agricultural lime in the amount of $182.40. The receipt is signed by the cooperative's manager. The receipt is stamped. The receipt was filed by my client's wife on the date it was issued. Krasik nodded slightly. Mr. Doherty, I'm not sure why you're showing me a 2003 receipt. The audit covers 2018 through 2023. I am showing you this receipt, Mr. Krasik, because your agency audited my client in 2004. Tax year 2003. The auditor was a man named Robert Henning, who is now retired. Mr. Henning examined this exact receipt. He approved the deduction. He closed the audit with no changes. Philip reached into a folder he had brought with him. He pulled out a single document. It was a letter on IRS letterhead, dated June 11, 2004, signed by Robert Henning, closing the 2003 audit and accepting all claimed Schedule F deductions as substantiated. He laid it on the table next to the lime receipt. In 2004, Mr. Krasik, this same documentation system, these same shoeboxes, these same rubber bands, this same handwriting, was deemed by the service to be sufficient. The audit was closed, no changes. The receipts in this room have been examined by the IRS before, and accepted. Krasik did not move. Philip continued. There were 2 further audits, tax year 2009, tax year 2014, both closed with no changes, both based on the same documentation system. I have the closure letters here. He laid out 2 more documents. Each one bore the IRS seal. Each one was signed. The room was quiet. Margaret Vesco picked up the 2004 letter. She read it. She picked up the 2009 letter. She read it. She picked up the 2014 letter. She read it. She turned to Krasik. She did not say anything. Krasik finally spoke. Mr. Doherty, the closure of prior audits does not bind the service in subsequent examinations. It does not, but it establishes that the service has reviewed and accepted this documentation system on 3 separate occasions over 21 years, and it raises a question about the consistency of the service's enforcement posture. Philip paused. Mr. Krasik, my client is 71 years old. He has paid federal income tax every year since 1972. He has been audited 4 times. 3 of those audits were closed with no changes based on the same records you are looking at. The 4th audit is this one. I am prepared to take this case to the United States Tax Court. I am also prepared, if necessary, to request a formal review by the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration into the inconsistency of the service's treatment of identical documentation across 4 separate audits. Margaret Vesco set down the 3rd letter. She spoke quietly. Dean, can I have a moment with you in the hallway? They were gone for 14 minutes. When they came back, Margaret Vesco sat down. Dean Krasik did not. She spoke. Mr. Brennan, Mr. Doherty, upon further review of the documentation provided, the service is prepared to accept the substantiation as submitted. The proposed assessment of $402,180 is withdrawn. We will issue a no-change letter for tax years 2018 through 2023 within 30 days. The audit is closed. Philip nodded. He did not smile. Thank you. He stood. Walter stood. They began to put the lids back on the shoeboxes. It took them 4 trips to bring the boxes back down to the truck. Walter drove home that afternoon. The drive from Knoxville back to Polk County was 3 hours. He did not turn on the radio. He stopped once for gas at a station outside Athens. He bought a coffee. He did not drink it. He pulled into the driveway at 5:12 in the afternoon. His son Andrew was already there. Andrew was 43 years old. He worked at a paper mill in Calhoun. He had driven over from his house when Walter had told him the audit was that morning. Andrew helped him carry the boxes back to the spare bedroom. They stacked them on the metal shelves Walter had built for Eleanor in 1983. They put each year back in its place. It took an hour. When they were done, Walter and Andrew walked out the back door of the house. They walked across the yard. They walked through the gate into the lower pasture. They did not speak. They walked the fence line. The cattle moved away from them slowly. The April light was long and yellow over the ridge to the west. The grass was tall and green from the spring rain. They walked all the way to the back of the property, to the cedar tree at the corner of the south fence. The tree had been there when Walter bought the land in 1981. It was older than that. It had been there when his grandfather was a boy. They stood under it for a while. Andrew finally spoke. "Mama did this." Walter nodded. "She knew. She knew." They stood there a little longer. The sun moved another inch toward the ridge. A red-tailed hawk crossed the field behind them, low and slow, hunting the edge of the cedar line. They turned and walked back to the house together. Neither one of them said anything else. Eleanor Brennan had spent the last 6 months of her life organizing receipts in cardboard boxes. She had used rubber bands. She had labeled them by month. She had told her husband to keep doing it the same way after she was gone. She had not known about the audit that would come 10 years later. She had not known about Dean Krasick or Margaret Vesco. She had only known that the records had to be kept, and that her husband would keep them the way she taught him to keep them, because that was the kind of woman she was. There are men and women across this country right now who are being told that their records are not good enough, that their handwritten ledgers are artifacts, that their cardboard boxes are not what tax law accepts. Some of them will believe it. Some of them will pay what they should not have to pay. Some of them will lose what they should not have to lose. But some of them, the ones whose mothers or wives or fathers taught them to keep the receipts and label the boxes, will open the lid and find that the proof has been there all along. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who has a shoebox in a closet somewhere, or a folder in a drawer, and isn't sure whether it still matters. It does. It still does. Subscribe. Next time, the story of a woman in West Virginia whose late husband kept every fuel receipt for 34 years, and what the highway department found when they tried to take her farm. We'll see you there. Paste your script.